My name is Yvonne Caldwell, and for 19 years my only daughter thought I was the reason her father drank himself to sleep every night. She didn't come to that conclusion on her own. Nobody ever does. Someone had to put that story in her head, repeat it enough times that it settled into her bones like something she'd always known. By the time she was grown, she carried it the way you carry your last name, automatically, without thinking, like it was just a fact of who she was. I found out what she really thought of me, the way I found out most things in those years. Too late, and through someone else. The call came on a Wednesday morning in March. I was standing at the window of my office on the 32nd floor of a building in downtown Atlanta, watching the traffic crawl along Peachtree Street below. I had a meeting in 40 minutes, a conference call after that, and a property closing scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. My calendar was full. My life was full. It had taken me a long time to be able to say that and mean it. When my cell phone rang and I saw the number, I didn't recognize it. But I answered anyway. Something told me to. Yvonne. Not Mum. Not Mother. Just my name, clipped and cold. The way you'd say the name of someone you owed money to. I hadn't heard that voice in 11 years. It had been a little girl's voice the last time. High-pitched, frightened, asking me why the police were in our house. Now it was a woman's voice, low, controlled, like she'd practiced what she was going to say. "It's your daughter," she said. "I'm calling because my father asked me to." My hand tightened on the phone. "Of course he did. We're hosting a dinner," she continued. "Saturday evening, 6 o'clock, at the house. My father's retirement celebration. He thought it would be a good opportunity for the family to be together." She paused, and I could hear the meaning she was putting into that pause. "He thought it would look better if you came. Appearances, you know. For the photos." There it was. Not an invitation. A prop request. "He wants me there for the pictures," I said. Essentially. She didn't apologize for it. I'll give her that. She had never been a girl who apologized for things she thought were true. "I'll think about it," I said. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "He thought you'd say that. He also said to tell you that Marcus and I are expecting a baby, due in October." She let that sit there between us. We'd like the baby to know both grandparents. She hung up before I could respond. I stood at that window for a long time after. Down on Peachtree Street, the morning rush had started to thin. A woman in a red coat was walking a small dog. A delivery truck was double parked in front of the building across the way, the driver unloading boxes with the unhurried ease of a man who had done this 10,000 times. Everything was so ordinary, and here I was, holding a phone, being summoned to my ex-husband's retirement dinner like a piece of furniture someone needed moved back into the room for company. I thought about saying no. I'd said no to easier things, but she'd said the word grandparents, and that word had weight. To understand why that dinner mattered, why my daughter's voice on the phone made my hands shake for an hour afterward, you have to understand where I started. You have to go back to the woman I was, before I became the woman standing at that 32nd floor window. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked at a tire plant until his back gave out, and after that he worked at whatever he could find. We weren't poor in the way people mean when they say the word dramatically. We were poor in the quiet, grinding way that just wears you down over time. The kind of poor when nothing is ever quite enough, and you spend your whole childhood watching the adults around you make do. I was good in school. Not brilliant, not the kind of student teachers talked about for years after. Just good, consistent, the kind of student who did the work and showed up. I got a partial scholarship to Georgia State, worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, graduated with a degree in business administration, and approximately $300 in my checking account. I was 26 when I met my ex-husband. He was 32, handsome in a careful, put-together way, the kind of man who always looked like he was on his way somewhere important. He worked in commercial real estate. He had a nice car, a condo in Buckhead, a way of speaking that made everything sound planned and settled. I was working as an office manager for a small property management company. He came in to look at a listing. He stayed to talk to me for 45 minutes. We got married 2 years later. His family was polite to me at the wedding. That's the most generous word I can find for it. Polite. His mother, a small woman with very good jewelry and very careful eyes, smiled at me across the reception hall and said I seemed like a sweet girl. The way she said it, sweet girl, like I was a stray someone had decided to take in, told me everything I needed to know about what she thought of the match. But I was in love, and when you're in love you tell yourself that people will come around. You tell yourself it's just unfamiliarity, just nerves, just the adjustment period. You tell yourself a lot of things. Our daughter was born 3 years into the marriage. I named her Celeste. She had her father's dark eyes and his stubborn chin, but she laughed like my mother, sudden and full, like something just delighted her. I was so in love with her, it was almost embarrassing. I'd worked part-time throughout the pregnancy and planned to go back after 6 weeks. But the morning I was supposed to return, I sat in the parking lot of the office for 20 minutes and then drove home. Quit over the phone. Told myself it was temporary. It was not temporary. I spent the next 4 years trying to be the wife my husband wanted and the mother my daughter deserved. I kept the house. I handled the finances because he hated paperwork. I coordinated with his mother when she came to visit, which was often, because she had opinions about how Celeste should be raised, and my husband was constitutionally incapable of telling his mother no. I smiled through dinners and holidays and conversations where I was spoken to the way people speak to someone who is present but not particularly relevant. And then the business started to slip. My husband had moved from his company to start his own firm, commercial property development, 3 partners, a lot of ambition and, as it turned out, not enough discipline. The deals started going sideways. The bank loans were called in. Money that should have been in the operating account wasn't there. And when I went looking for an explanation, I found paperwork I hadn't seen before. Withdrawals, transfers, my signature on documents I had no memory of signing. I confronted him. He told me it was complicated, that I wouldn't understand, that I should trust him. I told him I needed to understand. He told me I was being hysterical. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, his attorney had filed for divorce. What happened next took about 18 months and dismantled everything I thought I knew about how the legal system worked. My husband's family had money and connections and a very expensive lawyer who was good at his job. I had a mid-range attorney, a stack of documents I didn't fully understand, and the growing, nauseating realization that my name was on a great deal of financial activity that I had not personally initiated. The civil case named me as a party to financial fraud. Misuse of business accounts, unauthorized transfers. The story his attorney told was that I had managed the household finances and extended that reach into the business without authorization, which was partially true in the most misleading possible way. I had managed the finances because he asked me to, signed things because he put them in front of me, trusted him because he was my husband. The case didn't result in criminal charges, but it settled in a way that left me liable for a significant portion of the debt. I lost the house. I lost the savings. I walked out of the marriage with my car, my clothes, and about $40 in a checking account that had been frozen, and then unfrozen, and was now technically mine again. And I lost Celeste. Not all at once. That would have been cleaner. No, I lost her slowly, over the following years, in the way you lose a signal. First she was there, and then she was intermittent, and then the line just went quiet. His mother was a large part of that. She moved into the house with him after the divorce, just temporarily, to help with Celeste. And she was with my daughter every day, in a way I couldn't be, because I was working 2 jobs and living in a 1-room apartment in Decatur and fighting for every visitation appointment through an attorney I could no longer really afford. She told Celeste things. Small things, probably. The way you season a dish, a little at a time, until the whole thing tastes the way you want it to. By the time Celeste was 12, she had stopped asking to call me. By 15, she was cancelling visits. By 17, she told the family court mediator that she preferred to have no contact. I remember the drive home from that meeting. I don't remember much of it specifically. I know I stopped at a gas station at some point because I was almost out of fuel, and I sat in the parking lot for a while after I filled up, just sitting there. I don't know how long. Long enough that the attendant inside came out to ask if I was all right. I said I was fine. I drove home. I sat in my apartment, which was very small and very quiet, and I thought, this is the moment, right here. This is where you decide whether you get up or you don't. I got up. Not that night. That night I let myself fall apart, because I had earned that. But the next morning I got up, made coffee, and went to the library. The county library on Church Street opened at 9. I was there at 5 minutes past. I found the section on real estate law, property finance, business management. I had a notebook with me, a composition book I bought at CVS for $1.69, and I started writing things down, terms I didn't know, questions I needed answered, concepts I needed to understand. I had worked in property management before my marriage. I understood the basics. Now I needed to understand everything else. I found a free real estate licensing course through a community college in Gwinnett County. It met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I took the bus because my car had finally given out, and I couldn't afford to replace it yet. I sat in that classroom 3 rows from the front, and I took notes on everything, and I asked questions that probably annoyed the instructor because I asked a lot of them and some of them were detailed. I passed the licensing exam on my first try. Getting clients was harder. Nobody hands business to a woman in her mid-40s with a foreclosure in her recent history and a name attached to a civil settlement. I knocked on doors. I cold-called property owners whose listings had expired. I offered to work for a flat fee instead of commission, just to build a portfolio. I drove. In the used Honda Accord I had eventually scraped together enough to buy, to neighborhoods that other agents didn't bother with, because the properties were small, or the commissions were slim, or the work was just too inconvenient. And then I met a woman named Helen. Helen Garza was 71 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had been trying to sell a rental property in East Atlanta for 8 months without success. 3 agents had given up on it. The property was a duplex, both units occupied, one tenant significantly behind on rent, the building in need of foundation work that scared off conventional buyers. I sat in her kitchen for 2 hours. I asked about the tenants, who they were, how long they'd been there, what their circumstances were. I looked at the foundation report. I talked through the numbers with her, what a cash buyer would expect, how to price it given the condition, what she could realistically walk away with. At the end of 2 hours, Helen poured me another cup of coffee and said, "You actually know what you're talking about." I told her I'd been studying. She listed with me. We sold it in 6 weeks to a developer who was looking for exactly that kind of project. I used my commission, $4,200, to take a course in property investment analysis. Helen referred me to 4 other people. 2 of them became clients. One of them introduced me to a property manager who was looking for a co-investor on a small apartment building in College Park. That was the beginning. Over the next 8 years, I built slowly and carefully, the way you build anything that has to last. I bought a small single-family home in East Point, distressed, neglected, structurally sound, renovated it over 4 months, doing a significant portion of the work myself, watching tutorial videos and calling contractors to ask questions and making mistakes and fixing them, rented it out, saved the cash flow, bought another. I did not spend money on things that didn't matter. I drove the Accord until it had 200,000 miles on it. I bought clothes at consignment shops. I ate lunch at my desk and cooked dinner every night because restaurants added up. Every dollar I didn't spend was a dollar that could go into the next property. By year 5, I had 6 rental properties and a small commercial listing practice that was generating enough income that I could hire 1 part-time assistant. By year 8, the portfolio had grown to 14 properties across 3 Atlanta suburbs, and I had hired 2 agents to work under me. I moved my office downtown, 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows. I still thought about Celeste every single day. I followed what I could from a distance. Her college graduation, which I heard about through a mutual acquaintance because I hadn't been invited. Her engagement to a man named Marcus Webb, announced on social media, which I looked at perhaps more often than was healthy. The pregnancy announcement. Small squares of a life I was on the outside of. I had tried over the years to maintain some thread of connection. Birthday cards that were sometimes acknowledged with a brief text and sometimes not. A letter I wrote when she graduated, which she never responded to. A call I made when I heard about the engagement, which went to voicemail, and which I kept short and light, and which she did not return. So when her call came in March, I sat with it for a week before I answered the question of whether I would go. And then I thought about the word grandparents. And I thought about a child who would grow up hearing one version of a story if I didn't show up and offer something else. I called my attorney. Then I called the woman who had done my hair for the past 6 years, because I had an idea about how I wanted to walk into that room, and it was going to require some preparation. The dinner was at the house in Buckhead. My ex-husband had bought it 10 years ago, after the settlement, after the money from his family came through. I had driven past it once by accident, on my way somewhere else. 5,000 square feet, a circular driveway, the kind of landscaping that required professional maintenance, the kind of house that was meant to make a statement. I arrived at 6:15, 15 minutes after the invitation said, which was a deliberate choice, the same way everything about that evening was a deliberate choice. The car I arrived in was a black Mercedes S-Class, borrowed from a colleague who had offered it when I mentioned, offhandedly, what I was walking into. My attorney sat in the passenger seat. I had asked her to come, not as a lawyer, but as a witness and a friend, and she had agreed. She was 63 years old and had the posture of a woman who had walked into difficult rooms her whole career and come out the other side every time. "Ready," she said. "I've been ready for 11 years, I said. "I've been ready for 11 years, I said. I'd had a dress made. Not bought, made. A woman I knew through a client ran a small atelier in Midtown. Midnight blue silk, structured shoulders, clean lines. Understated in the way that only very expensive things can be understated. My hair was silver now, had been for several years, and I had stopped apologizing for it somewhere around year 3 of the building years. I wore it natural, coiled close, and I wore the pearl earrings my mother had saved up to give me when I passed my licensing exam, the last gift she'd given me before she passed. The front door was opened by a young woman I didn't recognize. A caterer, I realized, hired for the event. She took my coat. I walked into a house full of people who knew my name and had been told a story about it. My ex-husband was standing near the fireplace in the living room, a glass of wine in his hand, talking to a man I vaguely recognized as one of his golf partners. He saw me and his expression did something complicated. Surprise first. Then something else, something like recalculation, his eyes taking in the dress. And then my attorney beside me, and then some understanding arriving that this evening might not go the way he had planned. He did not collapse. I want to be precise about that. He was a man who had spent decades managing appearances, and he was good at it. What he did was go very still, the way people go still when they need a moment to regroup. His mother was in the corner near the dining room entrance. She was in her late 80s now, smaller than I remembered, but with the same careful eyes. She saw me, and she looked away immediately, which told me everything about what she knew and what she expected. And then I saw Celeste. She was standing with her husband Marcus near the window. She was 31 years old, and she was beautiful. And she looked, from across the room, so much like the child I had carried and bathed and read to sleep, that something in my chest moved in a way I hadn't expected and couldn't entirely control. She saw me and went completely still. I walked toward her, not fast. I wasn't there to cause a scene, and I wasn't there to perform anything. I was there because she had a baby coming, and that baby deserved a grandmother who hadn't been written out of the story before the story was finished. "Celeste," I said, "you look beautiful. Congratulations." She stared at me. Whatever script she had prepared for this evening, whatever version of me she had expected to see, I was not it. I watched her eyes move over me, the dress, my posture, my attorney standing a respectful distance behind me, and something shifted in her expression that I couldn't name yet. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said. "You invited me," I said. "I'm here." Marcus put his hand on her elbow, steadying. He was a calm-looking man with a kind face. He introduced himself to me. We shook hands. I told him I was glad to meet him. I meant it. The dinner proceeded the way these things do, with a kind of surface order that covered a great deal of undercurrent. My ex-husband gave a speech about his career, his accomplishments, his vision. He mentioned his family. He did not mention me. His mother nodded along from the end of the table. And then Celeste's father sat down and looked across at me and said, with the kind of casual cruelty that only very familiar people can land, "Well, Yvonne, I'm sure you're proud to be here. After everything." After everything. I set down my fork. I picked up my water glass. I looked at him with the clarity of a woman who had spent 11 years building something that could not be taken from her. "I am proud," I said, "of quite a lot of things." I opened my bag. I took out a folder. My attorney had prepared it, clean and organized, the way she prepared everything. "Since we're talking about after everything," I said, "I thought it might be useful for everyone here to have some context." I looked at Celeste when I said the next part, not at him, at her. "I want you to know what I've been doing, not to defend myself. I am done defending myself to this family, but because you're about to become a mother, and I think you deserve to know the truth about yours." The room had gone quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when people understand that something real is happening. "Your grandmother." I nodded toward the end of the table without looking away from Celeste. "Has spent 19 years telling you I chose money over you, that I was reckless with your father's business and left your family in financial ruin. I want to show you what I actually did with money." I put the folder on the table. Inside were documents my attorney had organized, property deeds, income statements, a letter from the business association that had given me their Entrepreneur of the Year recognition 2 years prior, a single clean summary sheet that put the numbers plainly. 16 rental properties, I said. 8 residential, 3 mixed-use commercial, 5 in partnership with a community housing non-profit that provides transitional housing for women and families. I kept my voice steady because I had practiced keeping it steady. Combined portfolio value, assessed last quarter, just over $6 million, built from zero, from $40 and a composition notebook and a library card. My ex-husband started to say something. My attorney cleared her throat, and he stopped. He had met my attorney in a professional context once, years ago, and he remembered her. Celeste was looking at the papers. Marcus had his hand over hers. I also want to show you this, I said. I took out a second set of documents from my bag. These ones I placed in front of Celeste directly. This is a letter from a forensic accountant named Gerald Stokes. He is 74 years old, retired, and he audited your father's company records in 2007, 2 years after the civil settlement. I paused. He found that the transfers attributed to me were authorized by your father's signature, not mine. My signature appears on documents I was told were routine household paperwork. The financial irregularities your father described in his deposition originated in the business accounts which I did not have independent access to. That's ancient history, my ex-husband said. His voice was controlled, but something under it was not. It's your daughter's history, I said, and your grandchild's. Celeste was reading. Her hands were completely still on the table. I had one more thing. I had debated this part. My attorney had said, use it if you need to, but the folder speaks for itself. I decided to use it. I took out a photograph. I had printed it from my phone, and it was not a professional photograph by any measure. It was taken at a distance, blurry at the edges. It showed a young woman in a green cap and gown, standing outside a university building, laughing at something someone beside her had said. Celeste's college graduation. I had stood across the parking lot and taken it from 200 feet away because I wasn't allowed on the grounds. I slid it across the table to her without saying anything. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at me, and what was in her face was something I hadn't seen in 19 years. Uncertainty, real uncertainty, not the performed kind. The kind that happens when a story you've believed starts to show its seams. You were there, she said. I was always nearby, I said, when I could be. The dinner did not recover after that, in the formal sense. People finished their food or didn't. My ex-husband's golf partner made a comment about the weather that nobody responded to. His mother sat very still and said very little, and I watched her, once, put her hand to her mouth in a gesture that might have been thought, or might have been something else. My ex-husband and I did not speak again that evening, which was, by then, beside the point. Celeste followed me into the hallway when I went to get my coat. "How long?" she said. "How long have you had all of that? The properties, the business?" "I started about 3 months after I left your father's attorney's office for the last time," I said. "I went to the library that Tuesday, and I started writing things down." She was quiet. "I don't expect you to take my word for anything," I said. "I'm not asking you to change how you feel overnight. That's not why I came. I came because your baby deserves to know its grandmother, and I want the chance to be that. If you'll let me." "I told the mediator I didn't want contact," she said. "It wasn't an accusation. It sounded like she was trying to understand how she had gotten from there to here. You were 17 and someone had been telling you a story for 12 years, I said. You did what you knew how to do. She looked at me. Her eyes filled, and she looked away, and when she looked back, she had blinked it clear. I need time, she said. You can have all the time you need, I said. I'm not going anywhere. I have offices downtown if you want to see me. I have coffee every morning at 7:30 if you ever want to call. I am not fragile, Celeste. I've been not fragile for a long time. You can ask me hard questions and I won't fall apart. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He looked at his wife, then at me. We should get going, he said gently. Long drive. Celeste nodded. She put on her coat. At the door, she paused with her hand on the frame and said, without turning around, "The accountant, Gerald Stokes. Will he testify to what he found?" "He already has," I said, "in writing. My attorney has filed a petition to revisit the civil judgment. It will take time, but yes." She nodded once and walked out. I stood in the hallway of my ex-husband's house in the coat I'd retrieved from the caterer, and I listened to the sound of 2 cars starting in the driveway. After a while I went back in, found my attorney, and said I was ready to leave. She drove us back downtown. Neither of us said much. When she dropped me at my building, she said, "You did well," and I said, "Let's see what happens," which was the most honest thing I could have said. What happened took some time to unfold, the way things do. The civil judgment review moved through the process. Gerald Stokes, who was in declining health but clear in his recollections, provided a written and then a verbal deposition confirming that the transfers in question had been authorized through channels I did not control and signed under a name that was not mine. The revised assessment did not erase the settlement. Nothing could fully do that, but it placed the liability where it had always belonged. My ex-husband did not lose everything. Men like him rarely do. But the revision became part of the public record, which meant it became part of the record that anyone could find if they looked. Celeste called me 6 weeks after the dinner. She called on a Thursday morning, which I learned later was significant because Thursday mornings were when her father's family did their weekly call, and she had begun skipping them. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. I know because I looked at my call log after. We talked about practical things first, the baby, the due date, whether she was feeling well, the apartment they were looking at in Decatur. And then she asked me about the library, about the composition notebook, about how you begin something when you have nothing. I told her you pick up a pen. The baby, a girl, was born in late October. Her name is Noelle. I was in the waiting room when she arrived, which was where Celeste asked me to be, and when Marcus came out to tell me I could come in, my hands shook so badly that I knocked over the coffee cup I'd been holding for 3 hours. Celeste was exhausted, and she looked like the most complete version of herself I'd ever seen. She put Noelle in my arms and I held her, and I thought about my mother's house in Columbus, about the library on Church Street, about $40 and a composition notebook, about Helen Garza's kitchen and the duplex in East Atlanta and the 32nd floor with its floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over a city that had never made anything easy for me. I thought about every night I had spent building something in the dark without knowing if anyone would ever see it, and I looked at this small face, this entirely new person with no stories yet, no versions, no histories handed down to her by people with agendas, and I thought, this one gets the truth from the beginning. 3 months later, I opened a building in East Atlanta, renovated, 4 residential units, and 1 ground-floor commercial space that now houses a free financial literacy program for women navigating divorce or financial hardship. The program is called Second Ledger. We offer 12-week courses in personal finance, property basics, and business registration. The first cohort had 11 women. 6 of them have since opened their own bank accounts. 2 of them have started small businesses. One of them bought her first property 6 months after completing the course. On the wall inside the front door, there is a framed photograph. It is the blurry, 200-foot parking lot picture of Celeste in her graduation cap and gown, laughing at something just outside the frame. Celeste chose the frame. She hung it herself. I am 62 years old. My name is Yvonne Caldwell. I have been called difficult and absent, and the reason for things that were not my doing. I have spent a significant portion of my life being the story that other people told about me. I am not that story. I am the library on a Tuesday morning. I am the composition notebook and the bus to Gwinnett County and the $4,200 commission that went back into the next course. I am 16 properties and a $6 million portfolio and a granddaughter named Noelle who grabbed my finger in the hospital and held on, the way new things do, with everything she had. I am still here. I rose. And this time my daughter watched me do it. I've thought about that dinner table a lot since October, not the part where I put the folder down, not the part where I said the numbers out loud. I think about the moment right after, when the room went quiet and I watched my daughter's face change. Not dramatically, not like the movies, just slowly the way light shifts in a room when someone finally opens a window that's been painted shut for years. That's what truth does. It doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it just sits down next to you and waits. I spent a long time angry at what was done to me, and I won't pretend the anger wasn't justified, because it was. What my ex-husband's family built around Celeste, that careful, years-long architecture of half-truths and managed silences, that was a real thing that caused real damage. I'm not interested in minimizing it, but I also know that anger, if you let it drive, will take you somewhere you didn't mean to go. I watched other women in those early years let the anger steer. Some of them are still parked in the same place, engine running, going nowhere. I understood them completely. I just couldn't afford to join them. What I could afford was a library card. What I could afford was a composition notebook and a bus ride and the willingness to be the least experienced person in a community college classroom on a Tuesday night. That's not inspiration. That's just arithmetic. I had nothing else, so I used what was there. The thing about building something from almost nothing is that it teaches you to think differently about what you actually need. I thought I needed someone to believe me. I thought I needed vindication, a moment where someone in a position of authority looked at the record and said, "You were right, they were wrong." And eventually that did happen, through Gerald Stokes and his deposition and my attorney's petition. But by the time it happened, it was almost beside the point. What had mattered more, day to day, was the discipline of showing up. The Accord with 200,000 miles on it, the same 3 outfits, the spreadsheets I kept on a used laptop that froze if you had more than 4 tabs open. You become what you repeatedly do. I know that sounds simple. It is simple. Simple is not the same as easy. Helen Garza saw something in me at her kitchen table that I wasn't entirely sure was there yet. She said I knew what I was talking about, and I told her I'd been studying. But what she was really responding to, I think, was that I wasn't performing confidence. I was just honest about what I knew, and honest about what I didn't. That honesty, not the polished kind, the plain kind, turns out to be rare enough that people notice it. Celeste is going to make mistakes raising Noelle. I will probably make mistakes being her grandmother. We are starting from a place that has a lot of history in it, and history doesn't dissolve just because you decide to try. But what I know is this: the worst thing that was done to my daughter wasn't the lies themselves. It was that she was raised without access to the full picture. She was handed a story and told it was the truth and never given the tools to question it. That's what Second Ledger is really about, underneath the financial curriculum. It's about teaching women to read the full document before they sign anything, literally and otherwise. To ask where that number came from. To understand that a story told to you by someone with a stake in the outcome is not the same as evidence. I want Noelle to grow up knowing how to read the room and also how to read the contract. I want her to know that dignity is not something someone gives you. It's something you build, slowly, in the places nobody's watching, until one day you walk into a room in a midnight blue dress and it's just obvious. I am 62, I am still building. That, more than any folder full of property deeds, is what I want her to see.